So I'm going to talk about workflow automation with ScriptRunner plugin. Basically, the idea is to discuss a lot of real life scenarios and how you can actually get automation done. And I would also be showing some of the real life use cases which are not covered out of the box. That is something you need on day-to-day basis. So let's suppose a scenario that you enter a new organization and you have to scale up their Jira system to, let's say, from 20 projects, and they are using Jira day to day, whether it is software development teams, operations team, HR teams, and they want to scale it up to, let's say 100 projects in 1 year or 1.5 years. So there are in real life scenarios, you come across a lot of things which might not be provided out of the box. For example, a very simple thing is ability to create subtasks or ability and customize emails, not to depend on the built-in email template of Jira, but to send out customized emails, and then ability to perform certain events based on certain workflow transitions or have certain business logic executed when certain events happen in Jira. Like if you create a story in certain project, then you want to send an email to a product owner, or you want to create a related task in another project. All these things are very critical for end-to-end business process automation, whether it is whether you're just focusing on business or you're focusing on business plus the software part. So I'm just gonna go through this slide. This is basically the script runner, that is the Superman of Jira. A lot of functionality and a lot of things to learn. So let's see, I'm gonna go through them one by one. These are the major features. Of course, there are other features as well, but these are the major features that I would be covering. One is the built-in functions for workflow conditions, validators, post functions. Basically, when we have a workflow in Jira, in that you have certain transitions. That is, when you go from open to in progress, you generally click on a transition called start progress. So on that transition, we can have primarily there are three things that you have on every Jira transition. That is condition, validation, and post function. Condition basically means who can execute the transition. Validation is, for example, during the transition you have a pop-up screen and you want to check whether the value entered is correct or not, or whether if any value has been entered. That is validation. And then you have the post function. For example, you want to send a customized email to somebody, or you want to create a subtask after the transition has been executed successfully. That is the post function. Then you have the concept of scripted fields. Basically, in Jira, we are aware of some of the system fields like fixVersion, description, summary. But then there are times when you need certain fields which are getting their value from other Jira fields, but they are calculating their value. For example, if you have two custom fields and you want to have a third field which is basically the sum of those two custom fields, or you have a date field and you want to have a custom field which gives you just yes or no based on the value of a date field, whether the date is from this year or is it from last year. It's something very simple, but it is very much required in day-to-day project management, that you need to have the ability of fields to be calculated based on other system fields or other custom fields. So that is what scripted fields is. Then you have script listeners, basically ability to execute your business logic upon certain events in Jira. So if you're creating a story, or you're creating an epic, and then you want to execute a business logic, like I wrote a script listener wherein when you create a story, then basically the created story uh, fires a issue created event, and that based on that event, the story should inherit the fixed version of the parent epic. So this is something that was one of the requirements of the business, because fixed versions are related to releases, so they wanted to have a consistency in release numbers. It is very important for large scale projects that the releases reflect the right data. So for that, we need to enforce certain rules to make sure the data is correct actually. And one of the ways was to make sure the story always has the always inherits the fixed version of the epic. So that is what I was talking about in script listener. Then we have built-in script for admins, somebody comes to you and you're the Jira admin, and he says, okay, it's not working on my machine, but it's working on your machine when you log on to Jira. So like built-in scripts has something called, view Jira as another user. So basically you can, if you have the admin rights, you can become any user in Jira you want for the time being and troubleshoot the problem. Another very amazing thing about the built-in script is, apart from the other things like copying the custom fields, I'm going to show them later. Another really good thing it offers that is very useful in day-to-day troubleshooting is viewing the server log files. In large organizations, there is a very high possibility that Jira would be deployed on some other location, and you as a Jira admin might be working on some other location. And if you want to access the server log files, you need to raise a ticket, get the Atlassian Jira log file, and it may take a couple of hours at least. But using this built-in script, what you can do, you can just write your script in the script console with all the logging, and at the same time view the server logs in real time. So this is very, very helpful in troubleshooting. Actually, I'm going to show an example later on. Then you have JQL functions. JQL functions, as we know, Jira has a pretty powerful set of JQL functions already available, expressions, functions, but still in day-to-day life, you need certain JQL functions that are, very critical. For example, get me all the stories in the epics which are not closed yet. So that is something which is not easy to do in Jira actually. So but here it's pretty straightforward. Or basically get me all the stories where date A is less than date B, that is comparison of date. All these things are built into the ScriptRunner plugin, these functions. Then you have behavior module. Basically it's for client side validation. So when somebody is creating a story, let's say, and you want to make sure that there has to be a resolution set, there has to be a fixed version set if somebody sets a resolution to fixed. So things like that, I'm going to again show it with an example. Then I'm show how you can write your long scripts. With small scripts it is very easy, but if you are writing some complex scripts, then you need to have ID support for code completion basically. Otherwise you would end up spending a lot of time going through the Jira's APIs back and forth. So workflow conditions, these are the basic set of conditions that are available in the workflow. These are the built-in conditions basically which ScriptRunner offers you. Like, okay, the certain workflow transition, let's say start progress, it should only be executed if the priority is major, if the issue type is defect. So you can set it, like I have selected one of the values, that CF values my select list. This basically means CF values here is a picker for your custom field. So it's like a single select list, and I'm checking if the single select list value is this, then I should see the transition button. And if the value is not this, then the transition button will not be visible. In the same way, as you can see, you can have, has one or more attachments, reporter is in a particular group. So it is based on your requirements. You can choose any of these, and you can even combine using and or expressions. You can even combine them. So one of the real life scenarios that I'm going to discuss is basically there was a requirement. Okay, we have a story. A lot of times product owners create a lot of stories, but it doesn't mean that the story is urgent or the story needs to be worked upon immediately. Now the requirement was, okay, if there is a story created, then the story should not move beyond a certain point of workflow until and unless the story is linked to an epic. Because generally epics are big chunks of work that are kind of approved by business people have a very, they kind of keep a uh, good eye on the number of created epics and what is going on in the epics, but story is more at a developer level. So what the developer should implement, whether it is technical debt or whether it is new features, but epics is something which is at a higher level. So the requirement was that a story should only move forward in the transition if it is actually connected to an epic, because if it is not connected to an epic, then you don't know what kind of value the story is giving to the end users. So this was basically, you see, the code. This was how you embed this in the conditions. You have passes condition, which is a built-in variable used by ScriptRunner plugin. If it is true, then the condition would pass. If it is false, the condition won't pass. So what I do, I have this snippet in the basically in the transition condition I'm going to show, and that transition will not be visible until unless it is connected to an epic. And so I get the custom field manager. Using the custom field manager, I get the custom field object, that is epic link, and I then check, okay, if it has a value, then yes, passes condition is true. If it doesn't have a value, passes condition is false. To give you an example of this to get a better understanding, let me go to my browser. I hope my browser is visible.
Yes.
So let's create a new story. So I created this story demo 1. So you see the story is created, but I don't see the start progress button because it is not connected to an epic yet. And that is happening through the workflow condition that I just showed you. So now I go on the edit. I go to the epic link. I choose the epic. I update. And then you see the start progress. So this is a small feature, but it is very critical for large enterprises, because if you have like 10 product owners working across 10 teams, then you might end up with a lot of stories which are basically orphans. 6 months down the line, nobody would know why that story was created and why it was actually worked upon. So it is very important to have stories connected to an epic may be connected to a theme or an initiative, so that the real business value is visible of the work being done by developers. And these are the small tricks that come in handy to make sure that kind of transparency is in place. Because here, as a developer, I would know, okay, this is the epic I'm working on. I can click on it, I can see the epic, and if I have a portfolio plugin as well, then here just beneath the epic name you would see the parent link. Parent link is basically a field coming from portfolio, and then you see, okay, the parent initiative. So it brings in a lot of transparency. So this kind of small trick kind of makes it very easy for everybody to track everything what is going on from right at the top level up to the very bottom story level. So let's move ahead. Then you have workflow validation. It is something very similar to workflow condition, but there are certain rules in this which kind of come in very handy, because a lot of times, for example, you might have a transition which says QA done. So you click on the QA done transition and you see a pop-up which basically says, okay, please enter the date when the QA was done, and please attach your test report. So in this case, this is a very common requirement where when the QA says done, they need to attach some kind of test report actually. If they are not, they can use it. There are plugins as well in Jira for it, but sometimes people are using some other tools or want to attach some dedicated test reports. So in that case, you can basically enter a workflow validation that it has at least one PDF attachment or it has one or more attachments. So that way you cannot move ahead in the transition until and unless the QA has attached one report. So this is again very important, because if there are a lot of issues being done by QA and there are no reports attached to it, few months down the line, nobody would know, okay, what happened to the reports if somebody is facing the same regression bug in the system. So this is something which comes in very handy. So this was one of the again a requirement, a real life requirement from business that I implemented. This is a script in custom validator, just like I showed the custom condition before. So this is a script which what basically it does. We have a certain stage in our backlog for initiative. Basically the hierarchy is initiative, epic, and story. So initiative is the parent of the epic, just like the epic is the parent of the story. So in the initiative, when the initiative reaches a state called added to roadmap, when that happens, it basically means for that particular release we are, or for that particular at least next couple of sprints, we want to freeze the requirements. So we want to make sure no new epics get added under that initiative for a certain period of time. So what we do here, okay, in the workflow, if when somebody creates a epic, we have this in the validation phase of the create transition, because in Jira for the create transition you don't have a condition phase, you have validation phase and you have post function phase. So for the create transition, basically I put this in the validation phase. Okay, this is basically an epic. Get me the custom field object, that is parent link. If an epic is connected to a initiative, then I move ahead in the code. I check the key of the initiative. I use the issue manager to get the status. Basically, first I get the issue object, that is the initiative, and then using the initiative, I get the status. This basically is a groovy style of programming where the null check is by question mark dot question mark dot. So that is basically null checks in groovy. So I get the status of the linked initiative through the parent link field, and once that happens, I check if the status is added to roadmap. If it is added to roadmap, I throw an exception. So this class is something which is recognized by ScriptRunner. If you want to throw a validation exception, that is invalid input exception class. So you throw it, and you add the basically the reason. So here, if anybody wants to create an epic and link it to an initiative which is already in added to roadmap state, that is the requirements pertaining to that initiative are already frozen. So then you won't be able to do that. Again, this is very handy in large setup actually, to make sure that, because sometimes teams have their budgets mapped to releases, and if people keep on adding issues to releases, then that might have an impact on the budgets. This kind of checks, okay, if we have certain amount of work, nobody should be able to add more issues to it. Then we have workflow post functions. This is kind of list of workflow post functions. There are some of these post functions which you're going to use quite a lot. I'm going to show them. Create subtask, send custom email, clones an issue, fire an event. So basically, you're working in a team, and the developer says, okay, development is done. Then you want a certain maybe subtask created for the QA team, or you want subtask, let's say, to be created to the release team. I mean, the possibilities are kind of endless when it comes to the dealing with real life projects, real life software cycle. How important it is to sometimes create subtasks for certain transitions and make sure that certain people are assigned those subtasks, so that in the morning if they come, they know what to work on. Because this is something very important in globally distributed teams. Your developers might be sitting in, let's say, London office, and they say, okay, we have done the development, and then the QA might be in India or China, and then they come to the morning in the office and they don't know what to pick up. But if the moment developer says they've done, and if a subtask is created with the QA manager or the QA leader, the assignee, then they would know, okay, we have to pick this up in the morning, the development is done, and then we need to start testing it. Another is send customized email. This is again very important. We know in Jira we have email notifications like issue update or an issue created, but the problem in them is they have a very generic template. If you want to implement some approval flows, in Jira, whether it is for some compliance or some audit purpose, then you need to have an ability to send out customized emails. um, the moment you go from step A to step B, then you might need to send an email to a manager saying, dear so and so, the person requesting the approver is so and so, and you have to approve it till so and so date. So we have three fields here: the name of the approver, the person who needs the approval, and the date till which it should be approved. And all these three things are dynamic, so based on the data entered on the issue. So in this functionality, send custom emails, what we can do, we can extract that from the issue object. So using the issue object, we can extract those values, create an email template. I'm going to show that later on. And then very easily you can actually send out customized emails on any number of transitions you want. And this is very important for approval flows in Jira. Then you have clones an issue, which we know one of the uh, primary annoyances I had with Jara was, why can't I clone an issue in another project? This is very important. If developer says done, then there is a ticket to be created in the for the release team in their project, or for the operations team in their project. So this is something that comes in very handy. You can by what it says actually clones an issue, but it actually means create an issue. I feel it's wrongly written, because cloning basically means the fields remain the same, but that is not the case. You can configure the fields as per your needs. So if the summary is, let's say, create an API, then you can clone an issue for the release team that says deploy an API. Then you have fire an event for an event listener. Basically, upon workflow transition, you can customize, okay, what event I want to fire, and based on that event, you can have event listeners. Scripted fields, as yeah, let's go back. Just let me show you an example of create subtask. Yeah, so we are back on the story that we created. If you remember, we have the start progress. I click on start progress. So the story is in progress. I click on start review. And here you see a subtask has been created automatically, code review. So this subtask, this is something which kind of comes in very handy. You can do code review, or you can do QA review. So depending on how you configure the post function, you can create subtasks. Then we have scripted fields. In scripted fields, basically, as I showed before, or as I explained before, basically, you can have fields which are based on data that has been calculated based on other Jira fields, or combination of a field or a date, whatever you wish, based on the business requirement. So to understand it better, actually, let's see some examples. This is one of the very basic example, which it is right from the documents of ScriptRunner. Basically, you want to have a field which kind of shows the number of attachments for an issue. So what you do, you just get a component accessor, you get an attachment manager. This is something important to understand if you're starting with ScriptRunner, or if you're starting a bit with Groovy. Component accessor is a primary class in the Jara ecosystem. If you want to access any component, you need to start with component accessor. And almost all functionalities in Jira have their own components. So I want to get attachment, I use component accessor dot get attachment manager. If I want to work on issues, I would do component accessor dot get issue manager. If I want to work on comments, I would do get comment manager. So each functionality in Jira, whether it is issues, whether it is comments, it is bundled into its own manager, and then you can access that manager using the component accessor. So here I get the attachment manager, I have the attachment manager, I get the attachments for that issue, I get the size, and I return the size. So if the size exists, return it, otherwise return null. So null here means the scripted field won't be visible, because when the custom fields are empty, they are not visible. So this is again an example. Basically, this was again a very important business requirement or real life scenarios. If you're using a portfolio plugin, in portfolio plugin, generally the hierarchy is initiative, epic, and story, because epic and story is something which Jira automatically provides us out of the box. In portfolio, people either use initiative, or they use themes, or they call it, let's say, something else. But the uh, point of matter is the hierarchy is initiative or theme, epic, and then story. And epic and story are connected using epic link, and the epic and the initiative are connected using parent link. This parent link is a new field in portfolio, and this is being used. Currently there is a open ticket as well, because sometimes parent link, you seem to think that it behaves in a certain way, but it doesn't, because it should behave just like an epic link, but it doesn't right now. But it's not an issue. You can get the key and the summary of the parent, so I'm going to show that in the code. So basically what you have here, you have a custom field manager, you get the epic link object, you get the parent link object, then you basically see, okay, this is basically the code which is part of a scripted field, and this field is placed on a story. So the original requirement was an initiative can have 10 epics, and each epic can have 10 stories. So if somebody is working on a story, they would have to go all the way back to the initiative to see how does my feature, that the feature I'm working on, fits into the bigger picture. So to avoid that, the requirement was, okay, on the story we should have the key and the summary of the initiative, that is the grandparent, because the parent is the epic. So for of the grandparent we should have the key and the summary. So this code is placed on the story. So this issue object here, if what you see here is issue.get custom field value. This issue object is represents the story object, because this issue object is basically the implicit object, and this scripted field runs when it is placed on the view screen of a story. So this issue object basically becomes the story. So you see, okay, is the story connected to an epic? If yes, then basically you see, is the epic connected to a parent link? That is, if epic.get custom field value parent link. And if that is the case, then you get the parent link reference, then you get the parent link key, you get the parent link summary, and you concatenate both. Otherwise return null. So on the story you would see, okay, I have, this is the parent initiative. So this is very important for the business actually, and also for the developers, because then the developers know what is the parent initiative that they're working on. Oh, this is another example. Basically the requirement was that that a field should exist, basically that should tell us if that field, if that issue was added to the fixed version after the start of the fixed version, after the start date of the fixed version. So it might seem a bit complicated to hear, okay, why is this required? But the business required it because fixed version means release, and there are certain point of time the release is frozen. So again, like I showed, if you remember just a few moments back, the added to roadmap thing, the validation added to roadmap. Similarly, this is like, okay, if an issue is added to the fixed version after the start date of the fixed version, we want to see how many issues were added. So this is what I do here. I basically get the change history of that particular issue, and then, okay, I go through the change items. I see, okay, if it has a start date, and then I get the change item bean. Then I go ahead and check if the change item bean exists or not. Yes, it exists. Then I check, okay, I compare it with the start date. That is when the issue was added to the fixed version, and what is the start date of the fixed version. If that is greater, I return yes. Otherwise, I return no. I know it is a bit complicated to understand, so let me show you a really nice example. So let's go to this epic. So let's change this to test release 2, because test release 1 doesn't have a start date. So it says, you see here, added after version started. So it says yes, because this epic was added to test release 2 after the start date of test release 2. So what is the start date of test release 2? So I go in the project, I see the versions. Test release 2 has a start date of 1st January 2018, and we just added it to the so let's do the test release 2. Okay, now what I do, in test release 1, let me edit it and get me the start date of 26th, that is Monday. I save it. So test release 1 is 26th. So I go back to the epic, and if you remember, I change, where is the epic? Yeah, here is the epic. I change it to test release 1. Now you see the value becomes no, because test release 1 starts on Monday, that is 26th of Feb, and today is 23rd of Feb, and I added it before the start date. So added after the version started? No. For test release 2, it was yes. So this comes in very handy actually, because we are using ScriptRunner in combination with a reporting plugin called Data Plane. So using data plane, we can create reports around, okay, get me all the issues that have the value no, and get me all the issues that have the value yes for a certain version. Then you can see, okay, why are issues being added to the version? Because you want to kind of keep a track on your releases. So this comes in very handy. So let's move ahead to the presentation. Script listener. Script listener is something which you want to execute a business logic after certain event has happened. This is very helpful and very common. So, and it's something similar to post function, yet it is not, because in post function it is still limiting, but with script listener you have much more functionalities. So again, this is another real life scenario wherein basically the requirement was, if somebody changes the fixed version of the epic, then all the child stories should have the updated version. So what I do, I have this code in the my script listener, and I am listening for the issue update event. So whenever there's an issue update event, this code executes. And what this does, this checks, okay, is the issue type epic? Yes. What changed in the issue? So I check, okay, what is the change? Is the change it.field equal to fixed version? Yes, fixed version changed. Then I move ahead. Then give me all the stories that are connected to the epic, because epic and story are connected using the epic story link. Then what I check basically, if both of them belong to the same project, because if they belong to another project, then the version might not exist in the other project. So you can handle that as well. I have done that as well, but yeah, let's leave that part, because that would really take a lot of time. But let's suppose the story and the epics are in the same project, and then basically what I do, I use issue manager to update the issue, and I basically set the fixed version on those issues. So I will give you an example. I go back to my epic. These are my stories. So now you see on the API 2 design API using Swagger, this is a story with test release 1. API 4, this is again a story with test release 1. Now, and both of these are connected to the epic API 1. So I change the epic. I change the fixed version of the epic. I make it test release 2. Update. Now I go and I just refresh. You see, test release 2. For API 4 as well, I go and I refresh. Test release 2. So all the stories automatically have their fixed version updated. So again, when you are working with so many product owners, then you need to these rules, sometimes you might think that, okay, why are we enforcing these rules? Don't they come naturally to, okay, to certain teams or certain product owners? But the thing is that in large teams, the chances of these rules not being followed is high. So if you can automate these small things, okay, I want to have the story in the same fixed version, because the fixed version is the release. And if the scope of the epic is extending that release, then I would split the epic to make sure that one epic is mapped to only one release, because that is very important for the management, because that way you can create some really nice reports. Because if your epic is across 2 or 3 releases, then the reports somewhat is not very concise. But if you have an epic in one release, and then you have all the stories of the epic as well in that very release, it is better for reporting, I feel. This is another example basically, wherein if a field on a story changes, then all the child subtasks are also updated. But it's the same thing, just like we have epic story, it's for the story subtask. These are the built-in scripts that I was talking about. Some of the commonly used one is switch user. Like if somebody tells you, okay, it is not working, I'm not able to use this JQL, or I'm not able to access this issue on my machine, can you see what is wrong? And let's say you're sitting in Netherlands and he's sitting in US. So what you do? So you just switch the user and you become him if you have the admin rights, and then see what is going on. You have bulk fix resolutions. So in Jira, if the issue is closed, you don't have edit permissions basically. Generally on closed issues you cannot edit them. So but a lot of times people use resolutions which they should not be using, and then later on you realize, okay, because of that I have my charts that are all screwed because the resolutions were not right. The resolution should be fixed, but it's duplicate. So then you kind of use JQL and bulk fix resolutions. Copy project, this is now also provided in Jira out of the box, but with ScriptRunner I have been using it since 2013, when it was very hard to actually create a project in Jira based on another existing project. But now it is provided out of the box in Jira, I think 7 onwards. Copy custom fields value, you can copy custom fields value from one type to another type. You can refer the ScriptRunner documentation for a list of types that are supported. Basically, script registry is again you if you want to see where all your scripts are in what workflow validations conditions, or sometimes people use script files. If you have big scripts you don't feel comfortable putting them in workflow post functions, you can give the path of your script file, that is also fine. So that is where script registry comes into picture. It kind of gives you the where all the scripts are used. So, and then you have clear cache. Basically it is useful. Sometimes what happens, you are doing something with the APIs and you update an issue, but that issue is not reflected in the database or in the Lucene index. So clearing cache is helpful, but be careful with it. Then you have JQL functions. These are some of the JQL functions that are provided by ScriptRunner. Quite helpful. Date comparison. So get me all the issues where, let's say you have two custom fields, custom field A and custom field B, and both are date fields, where custom field A is greater than custom field B. So this is something which is not provided out of the box, which you can do using date compare. Subtasks of, parents of, just like you have epics of, or stories of. So then you have expression, aggregate expression, issue field match, which accepts regular expression, project match, and then you have the added after sprint date. Get me all the issues that were added after the sprint start, and you enter the name of the board and the sprint. So these are very helpful. You can refer the documentation for detailed syntax, but for day-to-day usage, these are very helpful actually. I found there are others as well, but these are the ones which I found very helpful, and I just would like to add a couple of more to them. That is epics of and issues in epic. Basically, if you want to see all the issues in epic, that is just let me show you a quick example. You go here to your issue navigator. You see issues in epic, and you just see. So basically, you get all the issues in the epic. For the epic, in this resolution is empty, so you get these issues. So this is very helpful. And similarly, you have uh, epics of. So you can here basically give the expression for story, and then you get all the epics of those stories. That is, give me all the epics of unclosed stories or unresolved stories. So that is also handled using this behavior module. Like I explained in the introduction, behavior module is basically used for some client-side validation. It's pretty it's not as popular as the other functionalities, but still it's pretty handy. Like for example, there was a requirement that to make sure that a user cannot enter more than one fixed version on an epic, because as I explained, one fixed version means one release. So here you go on the create screen, you switch the type to epic, and then you go to the fixed version. Yeah, here it is. I do test release 1. Okay, up to this point it is fine. The moment I do test release 2, it shows me an error. Fixed version can only be one value, and it's a very small thing. The script itself is like 3 lines, but very useful, very useful in large product development. And that is it. Thank you.